everyone. So it is October 30th for me. For those of you watching this video, it's actually November 2nd, but the video itself was filmed on the 30th. So, you know. October 30th is actually a very special date to me, which might sound sort of weird. It's the week of Halloween, so you'd expect that to be the reason I'm celebrating, but the day before actually holds a lot of meaning in my eyes. And the reason for this is that the 30th was when I finished the first draft of one of my books. That alone is a pretty great event in general. If I'm gonna be completely honest, this book has so many stories tied to it that it made everything else that happened that day so much better. It's probably safe to say that the entire book itself is based off of jokes, just on its own. Anyways, for those of you who don't know, when I write books, I have very specific songs tied to each one, like to the point that I have one single playlist dedicated to each main character in the book. For this one, last time I checked, I think I had about 7, each of which had at least over 100 songs long. That could either be seen as impressive or a significant waste of time. But you see, for this book, I didn't actually have a song for it yet, if that makes sense. I had playlists, but I didn't have a main song to be at the top of the playlist for my main character, which is the one I'm drawing in the video right now. But lo and behold, after I'd finished the book, like written the words, the end, a song came onto the recommended section of YouTube, because that's where I listen to everything. And I hadn't listened to that particular song in probably a good year or so I didn't remember any of the lyrics, but I clicked on it anyways, and as I sat there and listened to the lyrics, I realized it was describing everything I'd intended to portray in the book itself. This is a cool feeling on its own, mostly because it's like someone wrote a song specifically for me and my story, and they didn't even realize it. And then, because that day couldn't have gone any better, after I'd finished listening to the song and added it to my playlist and everything, my sister comes into the room and reminds me that we're going to a book signing for my favorite author that night. I can assure you that I felt on top of the world. What's even greater about that was, you know, if you look at the illustration that I'm doing on the screen, you see that the main character is surrounded by these, like, book pages. And no, that wasn't because I thought it looked cool. Well, actually, partly because of that, but mostly because one of the main plots in the book is that Peter, the main character, is one of the, like, last people on his planet to even own copies of any kind of book. Except for this one other character, but I can't tell you about them because, you know, spoilers. So, Peter throughout the story is called Bookworm because I'm super creative that way, you know, and so you can imagine how thrilled I was when I realized how all the events that day were just like weaving together. It just made me happy, you know? Even the page that I'm drawing on has kind of a funny story behind it. So, about a year ago, I was participating in NaNoWriMo, and I was writing the first draft to the final book in this stories series. Now, I'm pretty fast at typing, but with being fast at typing comes a lot of mistakes, to the point that you probably shouldn't read what's on the page that I'm drawing on, because it's kind of embarrassing. It's not that good. It's just first draft stuff. And as I was typing away, trying to hit my word count goal, you know, back during NaNoWriMo, I went to switch my text to italics. For those of you who actually use a keyboard to type and not an iPhone screen, you know that if you hit Control-I, it changes to italics. But since I tend to type so fast, I don't even pay attention. I didn't realize that I'd actually hit Control-P, which is how you print. So I'm in the corner of the room just typing away, and in the other corner of the room, papers start flying out of the printer. So my mom is sitting there right next to it, and she pokes her head around to me and asks, "Are you the one who's printing all that stuff?" And it took me a moment to realize what had happened, and we both went into a panic trying to fix it and stop it from printing the entire book. This page, chapter 28, was one of the few survivors from that incident. Not to mention, the tales within the book itself has some pretty great stories behind it too. I don't think it's possible to actually mention all of them, but in terms of how I actually came up with a story and how it came to be what it is today, just let the record stand that there are probably more inside jokes associated with this book than there are pixels in the video. I say that with more seriousness than you know. Eventually, as my channel grows a little more, I might go into more of the nitty-gritty details as to how this story was created. I've considered doing like a how to develop story ideas video in the future, so I might save it for that, because I'm not kidding when I say that this book has been some places. I will say this though, the final book was actually, or like the final version of the book, the one that I'm going into rewrite for this NaNoWriMo this year, which is kind of cool. It was actually two of my stories that I merged into one. So Peter, or Bookworm, wasn't actually a part of the book for the longest time. He and a few other handful of characters were part of this entirely separate comic that I was working on and beginning to illustrate. From what I remember, in the comic, Peter wasn't even a main character. In fact, I think he died. I think I killed the poor guy off. Anyways, the book that I eventually merged his story with was completely different from the comic, because the comic was supposed to be this cute, light-hearted story. You know, where Peter dies. And I wonder why that never worked out. But the other one, it was like really sad. Like, compared to the story that the comic was supposed to follow, it was incredibly depressing. The main character in that one was named Lucy, so I'm gonna call it Lucy's story, just for future reference. So moving on, in Lucy's story, I basically got to the point that I realized that it was too sad, sadder than Peter dying, and I still wonder why that didn't work out. Eventually, somewhere, somehow, I got the marvelous idea to just mush the two and two together, and Peter became the main character. From then on, everything just sort of started to flow and work right. The characters make sense. For the most part, anyways. I mean, they still came from me, so they have their moments, but it's better, you know? And Peter doesn't die in this version, so it all worked out. And not to mention, my sister and I, without even realizing it, we both ended up with 5 characters of the same name. Like, in my story, I have 5 characters that have the same name as 5 of her characters. The one that's probably the most important is Luke. We both have a Luke in our stories, which, to be honest, every middle grade fantasy and or science fiction novel has someone named Luke. So it was only fate that we would end up with 2 characters of that name. So, yeah. Mine is Lucy's brother-in-law, and you know how there's always the main cast of about 5 or so characters in middle grade fiction? In mine, Luke is probably the dad of the group. In fact, at one point, he sort of just takes Peter under his wing and does things like teach him how to set up a tent or how to chop up firewood. So, you know, I think mine's better than hers. Hers has a sword, and that's the best argument she has for me. So, she's in the room. She's glaring at me. She is not happy. I should probably bring her on a video sometime where we can both draw our Lukes. That would be fun. She would enjoy that. She says hers would be better. anyways, now that you've all been introduced to Peter and his story, it's kind of weird though, because in real life people ask me about my books and I have near nothing to say because I'm not really sure where to begin, you know, like, and so my family is gonna watch this and find out all my secrets and start asking for more, and then, you know, more than what I've already supplied in this video. Yeah, that'll be fun. Anyways, I do want to thank you all so much for watching and for taking the time to listen to these fun stories. Eventually, you'll get to hear more, which will be, quite the ride, I can guarantee. Still not quite sure why I told you all of this. It's it's pretty random, but, I hope you liked the art, at least. If you want to see more videos like this one, please like and subscribe, please, because I hate self-advertising like this, and I will see you in the next video. Enjoy the madness. And the rest of the video. Bye.